Hi, 29, female. Never thought I'd be posting here, but I'm at my wit's end with my husband, 31, male, and his mother, 58, female. We've been married for 3 years, together for 5, and everything was great. Until about 8 months ago when I brought up wanting to be a stay-at-home wife. For some background, both my husband and I have always had good careers. I worked in tech sales for a company that specialized in enterprise software solutions. The job paid well, but was incredibly demanding. 60-plus-hour weeks, constant travel, high-pressure deals, and a toxic work environment that was starting to affect my mental health. My husband works as a software engineer for a mid-sized company making decent money, about $110,000 yearly. Last year, after a particularly rough quarter at work where I ended up in the ER with stress-induced chest pains, I started seriously considering leaving my job. We had always talked about having kids someday, and I thought maybe this was a good transition period where I could take a break from the corporate world, recover my health, get our home life in order, and prepare for starting a family in the next year or two. When I brought this up to my husband, he seemed supportive at first. We did the math and determined that while things would be tighter on just his income, we could make it work if we cut back on some expenses. I had also saved a good amount from my high-paying job that could serve as a safety net. The plan was that I would quit, take a few months to decompress, and then we'd start trying for a baby. The problem started when we visited his parents for dinner and shared our plans. My mother-in-law has always been what I'd call traditional but contradictory. She's the type who believes women should be mothers above all else, but also looks down on women who don't work. When we told her I was planning to leave my job, her face immediately soured. She asked a bunch of pointed questions about finances and kept making comments like, "Must be nice to have someone support you," and "I've always believed in pulling my own weight." After that dinner, I noticed a change in my husband. He started making comments about how much money we'd be losing and questioning if I was really cut out for being at home. He brought up concerns he'd never mentioned before, like, what if you get bored, or what about your career trajectory? At first, I thought he was just processing the change. But these comments increased in frequency and became more critical over time. About a week later, he sat me down and said he'd been thinking about our plan and didn't feel comfortable with me quitting my job with no real purpose. I was shocked because we'd already discussed everything. He'd agreed it made sense given my health issues and our family planning. When I reminded him of this, he said his mother had raised some good points about me potentially taking advantage of him. The situation came to a head when he suggested that instead of me quitting entirely, he would give me an allowance from his salary while I figured out my next steps. He framed it as a compromise, but it felt incredibly patronizing. Still, wanting to save our marriage and my sanity, I reluctantly agreed. I quit my job and he set up a separate account for me with a monthly transfer of $1,500, which was barely enough to cover my personal expenses and contribute to some household costs. In about 3 months, things were tense but manageable. I took care of our home, cooked all meals, handled all the errands and appointments, and started looking into freelance work to supplement the allowance. I was happier being away from my toxic workplace and thought my husband was seeing the benefits too. Our home was more organized, we were eating healthier, I was less stressed. Then came the day I overheard a phone call between my husband and his mother. I wasn't eavesdropping intentionally, I was just bringing him coffee in his home office when I heard him say, "I know, Mom, you were right about the red flags. I'm doing what you suggested to teach her a lesson." I was stunned. When I confronted him later, he admitted that his mother had convinced him that my wanting to be a stay-at-home wife before having children was a huge red flag, and that I was trying to trap him into supporting me forever. She had apparently been sending him articles about gold diggers and stories about men who were taken advantage of by manipulative wives. The worst part? He told me he had been deliberately making the allowance small and had planned to reduce it over time to encourage me to go back to work. He thought once I realized how hard it was to live on a limited budget, I would come to my senses. I was devastated. Not only had my mother-in-law poisoned my husband against me, but he had also chosen to manipulate me financially rather than have an honest conversation about his concerns. I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister for a few days to clear my head. While at my sister's, I decided that if returning to work was so important to my husband and mother-in-law, I would do exactly that, but on my terms. I reached out to a former colleague who had left our company to start her own consultancy. She had previously asked if I would be interested in joining her team, offering more flexibility and less toxicity than our former workplace. I called her and she was still interested. I didn't tell my husband about this right away. When I returned home, I told him I needed time to think about our future. He seemed relieved that I wasn't immediately filing for divorce, but was clearly walking on eggshells around me. The allowance issue remained unresolved. 2 weeks later, I had officially accepted a position with my former colleague's consultancy. The job offered a base salary of $85,000 with significant commission potential and was fully remote with flexible hours. It wasn't as much as my previous job up front, but the work-life balance was much better and I'd have autonomy over my schedule. When I told my husband, he seemed surprised but relieved. He immediately said, "That's great. I'll stop the allowance transfers then, since you'll have your own income again." I simply replied, "Yes, you can cancel those transfers. I won't need them anymore." What my husband and mother-in-law didn't know, and what I hadn't fully realized myself until I started interviewing, was that my skills and experience were highly valued in the current market. While my base salary was lower than before, the commission structure and profit sharing at this small company meant that my earning potential was actually higher than my previous job. Within my first month, I closed 2 major deals that resulted in commissions totaling more than my husband's quarterly salary. By the end of my second month, I had earned more than $70,000 in commissions alone, on top of my base salary. My company was thrilled, and I was offered a partner track position that would include equity in the business. I didn't immediately share these details with my husband. I set up my own separate bank account, something I'd never done before. We'd always had joint accounts and had my paychecks deposited there. I continued to contribute the same amount to our household expenses as I had been with the allowance, despite now earning significantly more. Yesterday, everything blew up. My husband accidentally saw an email notification on my phone congratulating me on closing another major deal with commission numbers clearly visible. He was shocked and asked why I hadn't told him about my success. Before I could answer, he got a strange look on his face and asked how much I was actually making now. When I told him the truth, that I'd made over $200,000 in just 3 months and was on track to make at least $400,000 this year, he looked like I'd slapped him. He immediately called his mother and put her on speakerphone, telling her how much I was making. I could hear the disbelief in her voice as she sputtered that I must be lying or doing something shady to earn that kind of money. Then came the part that really floored me. They both started arguing that since I was making so much money, I should be contributing more to our household. Specifically, that I should be paying for luxury expenses, like the renovation my husband had been wanting for his home office. and a vacation his mother had been hinting she wanted us to take her on. When I pointed out that just months ago they were both convinced I was a gold digger trying to avoid work, and now they wanted access to my money, they both got defensive. My husband claimed he was just being practical about our finances, and my mother-in-law said that family should help family. I reminded them that I had been perfectly happy to contribute my skills to our household directly as a stay-at-home wife, but they had made me feel like that wasn't valuable enough. I had gone back to work at their insistence, and now they wanted to dictate how I spent the money I earned. My husband's now giving me the silent treatment, and my mother-in-law has been texting me non-stop about how I'm being selfish and destroying the family dynamic. She's even suggested that my success is somehow emasculating my husband and that I should consider taking a less demanding role or finding ways to lift him up instead of outshining him. I'm at a complete loss. I feel like I can't win either way. When I wanted to be at home, I was a gold digger. And now that I'm successful at work, I'm selfish and emasculating. My husband seems unable to think for himself apart from his mother's influence. And I'm starting to wonder if our marriage is even salvageable at this point. Am I wrong for keeping my finances separate after how they treated me? Should I be contributing more to our household expenses given my income? And how do I deal with a mother-in-law who seems determined to paint me as the villain no matter what I do? Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for their support and advice. I've been overwhelmed by the response, and it's helped me gain some clarity in this chaos. After my post, I tried again to have a conversation with my husband. I suggested we see a marriage counselor to work through these issues with a neutral third party. His response was telling. He said he'd only agree if his mother could join some of the sessions because she's a key part of the situation. When I explained that marriage counseling was for the two of us, he accused me of trying to cut his family out of important decisions. That night I went through our financial records for the past year and made a detailed spreadsheet showing exactly how our money had been managed. Before I quit my job, we were contributing proportionally to our household expenses, with me actually paying about 60% since I earn more. When I was on the allowance, I was still contributing about 40% of my received funds to household expenses, despite it being money that technically came from him in the first place. I also documented all the unpaid household labor I performed during my time as a stay-at-home wife. Meal planning, cooking, cleaning, errands, appointments, management, etc., and researched the market rate for these services. The value came to approximately $4,000 per month if we had outsourced all of that work. When I presented this information to my husband, hoping the concrete numbers would help him see the situation more clearly, he dismissed it as creative accounting and said household chores don't count because everyone has to do those anyway. He completely missed the point that he wasn't doing them. I was handling everything while he focused solely on his job. The next day, things escalated further. My mother-in-law showed up unannounced at our house while my husband was at work. She said she wanted to clear the air between us. What followed was essentially an hour-long lecture about how marriages fail when women become too independent and how I needed to be more considerate of my husband's ego. She brought up her own marriage, saying she always made sure her husband felt like the provider, even when she was working. The conversation became even more surreal when she suggested I funnel some of my commission money through my husband's account so he could give it back to me as an increased allowance. This way, she explained, he would feel more in control while I still got to enjoy my earnings. I was speechless. When I asked her directly why she had told my husband that my wanting to be a stay-at-home wife was a red flag, she claimed that she was just protecting her son, and that women these days take advantage of hard-working men. I pointed out that I had worked just as hard as her son throughout our relationship, and had supported us financially at a higher level than him until recently. She waved this off as just lucky sales commissions rather than acknowledging my skills and effort. After she left, I called my sister, who is an attorney. While I'm not ready to file for divorce, I wanted to understand my options, and she advised me to continue keeping detailed records of all conversations and financial matters, and to make copies of all important documents just in case. My husband came home late that night and immediately confronted me about his mother's visit, accusing me of being rude to her. Apparently she had called him crying about how I attacked her when all she was trying to do was help our marriage. This was a complete fabrication. Our conversation was tense but civil, and I was mostly listening to her outlandish suggestions rather than attacking her. At this point, I decided to take a step back. I told my husband I would be staying at a hotel for the weekend to give us both space to think. He tried to argue that I was running away from our problems, but I stood firm. I needed time away from the manipulation and gaslighting to think clearly. I'm now sitting in a hotel room trying to decide what to do next. The marriage counseling suggestion is still on the table, but only if it's just the two of us. I've also decided that regardless of what happens with our marriage, I'm consulting with a financial advisor next week to protect my assets going forward. The question now is whether this marriage is even worth saving. Can someone who allowed his mother to convince him his wife was a gold digger and then tried to financially manipulate her ever be trusted again? I honestly don't know. Update 2. Things have taken several unexpected turns since my last update. After spending the weekend at the hotel, I returned home on Monday morning to find my husband in a completely different mood. He was apologetic and said he'd done a lot of reflecting while I was gone. He admitted that he'd let his mother influence him too much and that he had behaved terribly towards me. He suggested we try the marriage counseling I had mentioned, just the two of us. I was cautiously optimistic, but still wary. His sudden change of heart seemed suspicious, especially given how firmly entrenched he had been in his mother's perspective just days before. I agreed to counseling, but maintained my emotional distance. We had our first session yesterday, and it was illuminating. The counselor asked us both to describe the situation from our perspectives. My husband's version of events included several surprises. 1. He claimed he had never actually believed I was a gold digger, but had gone along with his mother's concerns to keep the peace in the family. 2. He admitted the allowance idea had been his mother's suggestion, not his. She had apparently told him stories about her friend's son, whose wife took all his money and left him after being a stay-at-home wife for just a year. 3. Most shockingly, he revealed that his mother had been financially supporting him in secret for years. She had been giving him $2,000 monthly as insurance in case I ever tried to take advantage of him. This money had been going into a separate account I knew nothing about. I was stunned. The counselor helped us work through my immediate reactions and suggested we focus on the key issues: trust, financial transparency, and boundaries with family members. After the session, my husband showed me the secret account his mother had been funding. It contained over $70,000, money that had been accumulated during our marriage without my knowledge. When I asked what he had been planning to do with that money, he shamefully admitted his mother had encouraged him to keep it as an escape fund in case our marriage went south. That evening, as we were still processing everything from the counseling session, my husband received a call from his father. This was unusual, as his father rarely gets involved in our issues and generally lets my mother-in-law handle family matters. My husband put the call on speaker at his father's request. My father-in-law sounded embarrassed but determined. He explained that my mother-in-law had been sharing a very one-sided version of our situation with him for months, painting me as manipulative and lazy. However, he had recently overheard her on the phone with a friend bragging about how she had finally gotten control of her son's marriage and was putting his wife in her place. My father-in-law apologized for not intervening sooner and admitted he had always been uncomfortable with how his wife interfered in our marriage. He then dropped another bombshell. My mother-in-law had been lying about their own financial situation, while they lived modestly, and she always complained about money being tight, especially when declining to help her daughters or extended family. They were actually quite wealthy from an inheritance and investments my father-in-law had managed. My mother-in-law had been controlling their finances for decades, giving my father-in-law a limited allowance while she made all major financial decisions. The parallels to what she had encouraged my husband to do, to me, were unmistakable, and my husband seemed to finally see the pattern. My father-in-law ended the call by saying he had scheduled his own counseling appointments and was rethinking his marriage after 35 years. After that call, my husband broke down. He kept apologizing and saying he couldn't believe he had allowed his mother to manipulate him so completely. He promised to cut her off financially immediately and set firm boundaries going forward. While I appreciate this apparent awakening, I'm still processing everything. The level of deception from both my husband and my mother-in-law is difficult to reconcile. The secret account particularly bothers me, as it shows a fundamental lack of trust in our marriage that existed long before our recent issues. I've told my husband that while I'm committed to the counseling process, I need to see consistent change over time before I can fully trust him again. I've also insisted on complete financial transparency from now on, including regular meetings with a financial advisor to ensure we're both on the same page. As for my mother-in-law, my husband has agreed to minimal contact for the foreseeable future. He sent her a text explaining that he needs space to work on our marriage without her input. Her response was dozens of emotional messages claiming we're breaking her heart and that she only wanted what was best for us. I'm still processing all of this and trying to determine if the damage done to our marriage is repairable. The involvement of a professional counselor has been helpful, but I know we have a long road ahead if we're going to rebuild trust. Has anyone dealt with a similar situation where family interference nearly destroyed their marriage? And how do you rebuild trust after discovering your spouse had a secret escape fund? I'm trying to be optimistic about our counseling process, but the revelations keep coming and it's hard to know what to believe anymore. Update 3. I honestly don't even know where to start with this update because everything has flipped upside down in a way I never saw coming. It feels like I've been living in a whirlwind these past few days and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. So just 2 days after I made my last post, I got an unexpected email from my father-in-law. He asked if we could meet up for coffee, just the two of us. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. He's always been kind but very quiet, almost passive. And after everything that had happened with my mother-in-law, I wasn't exactly eager to jump into another surprise meeting. But I remembered how calm and supportive he sounded on the phone when he spoke to my husband recently, so I decided to give it a shot. We met at this little cafe in town, and honestly, I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me. This wasn't the same quiet guy I'd known for years. He looked free, almost. Nervous, yes, but also like he'd finally decided to speak up after keeping quiet for way too long. He started by apologizing, really, truly apologizing, for not stepping in sooner and for not protecting us from my mother-in-law's behavior. He admitted that he had spent their entire marriage under her emotional and financial control, and now, after years of watching her manipulate not just him, but everyone around her, he couldn't stay silent anymore. Then he dropped something I didn't expect. He told me that my mother-in-law's behavior towards me wasn't unique. It was part of a long-standing pattern. Apparently, she's treated every one of her kids' significant others like this. Always testing them, always trying to find weaknesses, always trying to stay in control by undermining their relationships. He said it was like she couldn't stand the idea of her children growing up and becoming independent. And she especially couldn't handle the idea of another woman having any kind of influence over them. But what really hit me was when he explained why she was so dead set against me being a stay-at-home wife. It wasn't about me at all. Turns out when she and my father-in-law first got married, she had wanted to stay home while working on starting her own small business. But her parents, my husband's grandparents, were incredibly harsh about it. They told her she was lazy and selfish and basically crushed that dream before it even began. Instead of recognizing how unfair that was, she ended up internalizing their criticism and repeating the cycle, projecting all of that judgment onto other women, especially her daughters-in-law. So when I chose to take time off from work, it triggered all those buried feelings in her, and she reacted the only way she knew how, by being controlling, judgmental, and mean. Then came the biggest shock. My father-in-law told me he had met with a divorce attorney. He said that after discovering just how much she had manipulated him and all the financial secrets she'd been keeping, he couldn't stay in the marriage. He even showed me documents proving that my mother-in-law had been hiding large amounts of money, not just from me and my husband, but from their other kids too. He'd already started separating their finances and wanted to give us a heads up that she might act out or try to stir up drama as she started to lose control. When I got home, I sat down with my husband and told him everything. He was shaken, like deeply shaken. But he also said it explained so much about his childhood, about the way his mom always behaved, the constant guilt trips, the need to control everything, the way she'd pit people against each other. He decided to call his brother and sister to tell them what was going on, and that's when everything kind of burst open. Both of them had similar stories, how she'd interfered in their relationships, gotten involved in their finances, or just made things harder in general, all while pretending she was just looking out for them. Later that same evening, while we were still trying to process everything, my mother-in-law showed up at our door. No warning, just knocked on the door like it was any other day. She was clearly upset and demanded to speak with my husband alone. I said no. After everything that had happened, I wasn't about to let her corner him again. I suggested we all sit down and talk together. She didn't like it, but she agreed. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable and surreal conversations I've ever had. She broke down crying, saying that everyone was turning against her and that all she had ever done was protect her family. She said she had seen the recent transfers from my business account to our joint account and accused me of hiding money just like her husband was doing. That's when my husband calmly reminded her that she was the one who'd been hiding money in a secret account for years. And then, out of nowhere, she completely switched gears. No more crying. She got eerily calm and said she had always known I would be too much for her son. that she'd been preparing him for the inevitable collapse of our marriage. In her eyes, my financial success proved that I didn't need him, and if I didn't need him, I would eventually leave him. It was twisted logic, but you could tell she believed it. My husband finally stood up to her in a way I hadn't seen before. He told her very clearly that she needed to leave our home and our marriage alone. He said that while he wasn't cutting her off completely, he would no longer involve her in our personal lives, and she was not welcome in our home until she got professional help for her behavior. She left crying again, and not even an hour later, both of his siblings called us to say she had shown up at their houses too, crying, yelling, making wild accusations about their spouses. It was like she was spiraling now that she could feel her grip slipping. The next day we had another counseling session. We brought up everything that had happened. Our counselor gently suggested that my husband should consider doing some one-on-one therapy to work through the emotional mess his mom had created over the years. He agreed right away, no hesitation. We also met with a financial advisor to restructure everything. We shut down the old joint accounts and set up brand new ones with secure passwords and strict access. We now have joint accounts for shared expenses and savings, and we each keep our own separate accounts for personal use. Everything is transparent and we're both contributing based on our incomes. It feels like we're finally on the same page. Since then, my husband's been trying really hard to earn back my trust. He's been going through old emails and texts, pointing out all the little ways his mother had been planting doubts in his head, things I never even realized were happening at the time. He's also been supportive of my career in a way he never was before. He told me he's proud of me, genuinely proud, and admitted he was ashamed that he let his mom's toxic views cloud how he saw my ambitions. Whether I wanted to step back or go all in, it should have been my choice, not something she got to influence. As for my father-in-law, he's officially moved out. He's staying with his brother and working with his attorney to finalize the divorce. The rest of the family, including my husband's siblings and their spouses, are all backing him up and working to set healthier boundaries with my mother-in-law. She's becoming more and more isolated as people finally start seeing her behavior for what it is. This whole experience has been draining in every possible way. I've cried, screamed, questioned everything. But I'm also feeling something I haven't felt in a long time: hope. My husband and I still have a long road ahead of us. I don't think you just get over this kind of betrayal overnight, and I know his mom won't go down quietly. She's already shown how far she'll go to keep control. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like we're facing this together. We're a team. And no matter what happens in future, I've learned so much about protecting myself, standing firm, not letting someone else's manipulations make me question my reality. Thank you to everyone who followed this journey and offered advice or just kind words. I don't think I would have had the strength to push back and stand my ground without knowing so many of you were in my corner. I'll share another update if anything major happens, but for now, I'm just focusing on healing, rebuilding, and keeping our lives as drama-free as possible. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.